Against one another. But in many state legislatures, whether it's the anti-Sharia legislation that obviously is seeking to continue to stoke fears about the presence of American Muslims, or whether it's initiatives that are going after the undocumented, or whether it's the overly penalizing and continue criminalizing aspects of our criminal justice system, oftentimes those pieces of legislation are all happening and being passed in the same state legislature. But those times, often what we struggle with are those who are advocating are often sequestered in their own silos, not working together, not working as a part of one common struggle in the spirit that the Texas Civil Rights Project has demanded that we think about our work. And that work, for me as a person that lives on the South Side, that lives blocks away from a park that Martin Luther King Jr. marched in on August 5th, 1966, to fight and to contest and challenge precisely that type of segregation. King came to Chicago, as many of you may know, to challenge policies of restricted covenants, redlining, that kept communities of color, in particular black communities, out of white, ethnic, working class communities across the South and West Sides. And when he chose to march in Marquette Park, which was at that time a working class, white, Lithuanian, Irish community, there were many, even within the civil rights movement, even within the black community, who challenged King's and those who were organizing with King on that agenda, suggesting that in many ways it's a distraction, suggesting that why do we want to take up the fight of dealing with integration into neighborhoods filled with those who don't want us, those who hate us, those who fear us. But King understood something. And when he walked into Chicago that day, and when he walked into Marquette Park, he understood that he wasn't simply fighting for the benefit and the collective self-interest of communities of color and black folks who have been kept out of housing across the city, although he certainly was fighting for them. But he wasn't only fighting for a better Chicago and a city that had to fight and deal with the implications of what it meant to live with the residue of racism and segregated housing. He was in many ways fighting for the soul of the nation. He was marching for the soul of all of us who continue to struggle to make this nation live up to its high and lofty ideals. And King understood in 1966 that the gap between our world as it is and the world as it could be must be a place that those of us who are, like all of you in this room, are willing to sacrifice in. A gap that we're willing to sacrifice our time, our effort, our energy, and in some cases even our well-being. And in fact, when King did march in Marquette Park, and some of you may remember the footage, he had to endure bottles, rockets, rocks and bottles and epithets and curse words and things that he would go on to say a level of hostility and hatred, those were his words, that he had never seen anywhere in the South. But when asked about that struggle, King, and I'm going to get to what he said about whether he regretted being there, he spoke definitively. And I'll quote what he said, but before I do, I want to also lift up that day, there was also another person still alive, an extraordinary person, mentor, and another legacy in Chicago by the name of Rabbi Robert Marks. Not as well known outside of Chicago, certainly not as well known as he should be. But Rabbi Robert Marks, an organizer, was assigned by a federation of congregations in the Jewish community to be and the Human Rights Commission in the city to be a quote-unquote neutral observer of these marches leading up to that day on August 5th, 1966, almost 50 years ago. And because of what he confronted days and weeks before that day, he came up with the realization that he could no longer simply stand by and be a neutral observer, that he needed to plunge into the struggle. And he wrote a 2-page letter I brought with me that continues in my mind to be one of the most inspirational letters written by a person of any faith. Very concise and brief. And I think what we, those of us as organizers and faith leaders, would like to see all of our faith leaders do. In our tradition, it's called standing up for justice. وَلَوْ عَلَى أَنفُسِكُمْ, the Arabic words in the Quranic injunction are, which means even if it means standing against your own self. Rabbi Marks wrote a letter that day to the congregation, and he addressed them, and I'd like to read a couple words from that letter. What I saw in Gage Park weeks before today, or the days before, seared my soul in a way that my participation in no other civil rights effort has. I was afraid, and I am afraid now. I saw how the concentration camp could have occurred, how men's hatred could lead them to kill. I saw Catholic priests reviled and nuns spat upon. I found myself a rabbi standing guard like a policeman over a pile of rocks for fear that grown men and mothers dragging little children around with them would seize the rocks and throw them at the demonstrators. I saw teenage boys and girls ready to kill. I was on the wrong side of the street. I should have been with the marchers. This afternoon, I will join Dr. King and others who will be going back into the area. This time, I will be on the right side of the street. You may ask what my trip this afternoon has to do with Judaism. Is it not a waste of time and your money? I pray that you do not feel this way, that you see Judaism as relevant to the problem of our times, that you see a need for prophetic voices in our age, that you are willing to take a few risks to make the dream of a just world come true. Whether on the west side or Gage Park, men have to learn that is not by striking out violently in the dark, but by sitting together in the light of reason that they can resolve their problems. But when the light of reason fails, and when non-violent demonstration is met by such fanaticism and viciousness, then I have no choice but to join those who believe in democracy, who believe that silence cannot dominate truth. King, the year before marching in Marquette Park, spoke at an upper middle class, predominantly white suburb, some of you may know, on the North Shore called Winnetka, not far from Evanston. There, he told them that the civil rights marchers and the freedom marchers would be coming to Chicago, and he asked for their support. And he said something profoundly agitational in a way that King could only do. He asked them to think about their own positions. And he said, we must beware of the silence of good people. And brothers and sisters, when we think about the challenges that continue to confront us, the darkness that continues to confront us here and across the globe, we know that it demands the type of work, the type of legacy, the type of sacrifice, and the type of noise that people like Jim Harrington and the extraordinary workers the Texas Civil Rights Project have been making for the last 25 years. Thank you, Jim, for your voice, for your noise.